All right. I am Caitlin Donnelly. I am the chair of the AFP Board of Directors, and on behalf of the Charlotte chapter of the Association of Fundraising Professionals and Foundation for the Carolinas, welcome to today's session, Setting Up Your Board for Success, Recruitment and Retention Tactics at Work. Today's session is an hour and a half long. It will be split into two 40-minute sessions with a 5-minute intermission. The first session is about board recruitment, and the second centers around board retention. Before we get started, I want to make a few quick announcements. First, I want to thank our chapter sponsor, Boingo Graphics, whose ongoing support makes programs like today possible. Second, I want to invite you all to join us virtually on November 18th to celebrate National Philanthropy Day and to our community's local philanthropic heroes. As of this morning, there are only 40 virtual tickets left, so please do not delay. Now I'd like to turn it over to Jesse Herman, Assistant Vice President for the Center of Giving at Foundation for the Carolinas, to moderate our first session and introduce our panelists.
Great, thanks so much, Caitlin. And thank you all for being here today. Just a quick reminder to the audience to please go ahead and mute yourself. We will have an opportunity for Q&A at the end of this session, and you can also feel free to put any questions you have in the chat box, and we'll be sure to check that frequently as well. So it's my privilege to go ahead and introduce our panelists today. With us, we have Tina Postel, CEO of Loaves and Fishes and Friendship Trays; Jim Warren, the Executive Director of Carolina Raptor Center; Deviree Robinson, Vice President of Philanthropic Advancement at Foundation for the Carolinas; and via proxy, Joan Zimmerman, a wonderful civic leader and the founder and CEO of Southern Shows. Joan did have to step out of today's program, but she was kind enough to provide some written thoughts on today's topics that we'll be referencing throughout the program today. So let's go ahead and get started. I'd like to kick it off and just ask each of you to spend a minute or two talking about your role and what experience you've had working with boards, whether that's managing a board or serving on boards as well. So let's go ahead and start with Tina.
Well, wonderful. Well, thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here today. I'm the CEO of two newly merged boards of directors. So Loaves and Fishes and Friendship Trays recently merged. And so we took board members from both organizations and combined them into one. So I'm actively helping to manage a very large board currently, but I've also served on a wide variety of boards at the education level for the University of North Carolina, Charlotte, and also back in Montana, where I came from. So I've been on both sides of the board spectrum.
Great. I'm sure that'll be an excellent perspective for today's conversation. And Jim?
Good afternoon, everyone, and I really appreciate this opportunity to be here. So I may not look it, but I've got 40 years experience in the nonprofit world and literally started working with boards when I joined the YMCA staff in 1981. And so tremendous history across the gamut of different boards. Currently serve on two statewide boards, the Earthshare North Carolina's board and the North Carolina Science Network board, and have served on numerous locals. So I've got both as the executive director working directly with the board, and then as a board member working with the staff. So kind of varied experiences on both ends.
Wonderful, thank you. And Deviree?
Sure, thanks, Jesse. And thanks to all of you all for joining this program. It's great to see some familiar faces on my screen. In my role at the foundation as Vice President of Philanthropic Advancement, I do manage several boards, really through the start of the process through the end. And then personally, I serve on some boards as well. So I get to do all the things that I tell board members not to do. I'm currently the chair of the North Carolina Center for Nonprofits. I also serve on the Aldersgate board as well. And I recently rolled off of a third board I was on because, again, I do things that people shouldn't be doing, which is serve on multiple boards at once. So looking forward to talk about the different ways to be successful as a board member and different ways that you all can engage your board members to the best benefit of your needs.
Great, thank you. So I think we've got all of our bases covered here. Every possible board capacity, I think one of you has experience with. So looking forward to hearing your thoughts, certainly. So to bring us to basics of board recruitment, which is selecting the right people. So a question for our executive directors today: how do you ensure that the people you're working with, recruiting or prospecting for the board, are passionate about your organization's mission and that they'll be active board members?
Well, I can take a stab at that initially. And I just want to remind everybody ultimately too, as the CEO for the organization, that's not my job, right? Is to choose board members, because there's a conflict of interest there. And ultimately I'd be choosing my bosses, which sounds heavenly, but it actually could be some muddy waters. So you need to remind your board members that the onus is on your board of directors to make those decisions. And before you decide who, you have to decide what is it that you're looking for. We ultimately usually start with who do we want on our board, but what demographics, what characteristics, what values do we want on our board? So usually we start with those questions first before we even begin recruiting. And sometimes it starts with identifying who we currently have on our board. It's important to identify the gaps that you might be missing, you know, especially in regards to the year or two that you have ahead. So I'll share the floor with some of my other panelists and let them weigh in as well. But that's the first thing is we decide what is it that we're looking for before the who.
Well, and I'll speak for the Raptor Center, and I agree with Tina, it's the board's responsibility, but most often it falls on me to do a lot of the vetting, right? So there's people coming to me. We have the fortune of people reaching out to us. We're an organization that's sort of unique. And so when people contact us about being on the board, the other part too is that we have a matrix and we follow it. We look at all the grid and all the different pieces, parts that we want to try to fill. But for us, it's the affinity. Do they understand what we do? Do they love what we do? I mean, we could bring any number of people in various capacities professionally, but at the end of the day, are they going to really be committed and loyal to the mission of our organization? That's the key. And that just comes from lots of conversations, having people out here at the Raptor Center. How interested are they? How often have they visited? You know, we ask a board member, have you been to the center before? Absolutely. I've been multiple times. I've come with my company. I've done with this. And so for us, it's that connection. If we can't get that passion and that drive, they're not going to be willing to do the hard work that the board needs to do.
Great. And, you know, we talked a little bit about the values and the vision you're looking for with these board members. So Devary, when you are, you know, looking to serve on a board, what do you think are some of those important values about board leadership?
Well, I think transparency on expectations. So task assigned, financial contribution, time commitment. I think new board members should have a very clear idea of what type of time and giving commitments they're committing, or time and giving expectations they're committing to. They should be given a job description. It should include what those expectations are. I think the organization should also be clear on what the type of leadership they want, what they're looking for. So we're talking about, you know, governance versus management, right? So overall strategy versus input implementation. I think it's also helpful to have a culture of open communication, so that if board members don't feel engaged in the way they want to participate, they have an outlet to communicate that. And I know I wasn't part of the ED cohort to answer the first question, but I just want to add that I think selection criteria is very important. They're looking for folks who are going to participate in meetings, come to events, and ultimately champion your organization and your cause. So often I think nonprofits select board members for reasons that are valid, but maybe not fully thought through. And so I think Jim and Tina both touched on it. Just wanted to add that when you're thinking about financial resources, right? Sometimes it can be to the exclusion of people who can help raise funds rather than having it themselves. You know, well-known people will certainly raise the profile of your organization, but not if they don't come to events or speak out for your nonprofit. So I just think, you know, having some clarity up front about what you want to accomplish with the new board member, what they have the capacity to accomplish, and then what the organization needs are important. And so I think that ties into what matters most for the board leadership as well.
Great. And Joan kind of has a similar response here. She gave us a quick sentence. It says, in terms of board leadership, it's important to know that the leader is invested, engaged, and visible in the community, as well as the organization he or she serves. And then I think this is a great sentence to round out the topic with. They should be all in or I'm out. So leave it to Joan there. So transitioning just a little bit, when we think about things that board members are providing to the organization, it's resources, a variety of resources, guidance, governance, things like that. But specifically, we know that finances are really important. And you want board members who can help you raise resources, whether that's time, talent, or treasure, but often we want board members who are good fundraisers. So how do you approach that, and how do you measure that variable? What are you looking for in a fundraising board member?
Well, I can kick us off again. I certainly don't need to start us each and every time. It's interesting because I teach a nonprofit management course at UNC Charlotte, and I ask my students, they get to create their own board members. If they could have anyone on the planet, who would they want? And of course, everybody, Bill Gates and Oprah and Ellen DeGeneres makes everybody's list. But then we talk about, well, are they connected to your cause? And will they really, even though they have money, it doesn't mean that they're going to make 7- and 8-figure gifts to your organization. And so really what I'm looking for, I love fundraising. I love asking people for money, especially about when it's a cause that I care passionately about. And usually when you're recruiting board members, oftentimes they'll say, I'll do anything but fundraise. Because people are afraid of fundraising, right? Or we have a negative connotation of what fundraising is. So I flip the switch on that. And what I need from them are connections. Can you help connect more people to our cause? If you're afraid of making the ask, they don't have to make the ask. Help connect people to our cause. I'll gladly make the ask, or we figure out ways to ask, where they become more comfortable making the ask. So I don't start off with your expectation is to fundraise. I know that some boards do have a give or get policy, but the expectation is to help connect the people that you are close to in your circles to our organization and to a cause that you should care deeply about.
I completely agree with Tina. The other piece too is that I asked for their resumes and their nonprofit service resume, right? So as we're considering folks, I want to see what on other boards they've served, what have they done in the community, what they're able to do. And we tell board members up front that we want everyone, we want 100% participation, right? What does that mean for them? We treat every board member as a major gift. So I sit down with them. We have that conversation. The board chair sits down with them. We don't want this just to be a transactional, oh, I'm going to give so much to the Raptor Center. We want it to be a meaningful gift, and we state it that way. But when it comes to them asking for money, some just aren't good at it, right? But they do, as Tina said, have the relationships. They can get in to see people that I never could. And it's how they leverage those. Now, we have a perfect example. We have a board member, and we said earlier, Devire said, is I think sometimes we diminish people's role based on what their bank account may be. I think we've got to get out of that mindset. It's what's their connection within the community. We have a board member who probably has one of the less capacities of MBA on the board, but she's brought more money to us recently than anybody else. From grants that she's brought to our attention and it's helped shepherd, major donors that she's brought into the organization. So if you look at fundraising over fundraising, board member to board member, she's blowing it away from personal gift to everything else. And so I'd much rather have someone like that than someone's just going to stroke me a check. I want someone that's willing to do the work and get out there. And so it's fundraising is all of our job. It's relationship building. It's not going to make that ask all the time. It's getting me in the door, getting Tina in the door, by which we can then really pitch. And I'll ask a wall for money. I think most of you know that. I'll ask you guys on the call for money, and I know your DDs with me. So we're not doing our jobs if we're not asking for money. That's our role. Our role as executive directors is to be the resource securer for our organization. That's our job. We go out there and get resources so that everybody else in the organization can do the fun work. But I think when it gets to the board, it's having them leverage, and I use this term again, showing my age. If you know what a rolodex is, raise your hand. Well, you leverage your contacts on your phone, right? We used to say rolodex. You open the door so I can get in. That's the key.
I gotta say, Joan, almost word for word has the same thing for you that you said. She says, there's an old saying, it's not your Rolex that's important, it's who's in your Rolodex. And maybe I had to look it up, but nonetheless, makes absolute sense and definitely agree. Devire, anything you want to add there?
I would just note that from the board member perspective that, fundraising is a big part of being on the board. That in order to credibly solicit funds from other donors, whether it be individuals, corporations, foundations, And you want your nonprofit to be able to say that 100% of the board, is making an annual gift, something that's meaningful to them. And I do think that's incredibly fair to ask board members that they consider that nonprofit, to be a philanthropic priority for them. But to Jim and Tina's point, not everyone feels comfortable, asking others for money to support a nonprofit. But that is not a reason to not be involved in the fundraising process or their fundraising initiatives. There are so many different ways to plug in. You can help identify donors, as Jim mentioned. You can work on cultivating relationships with current donors through the work of the nonprofit. You can work on clarifying the message, framing the message that you're putting out to prospective donors. And then there's, somebody has to ask for money. But then there's also the stewardship piece, right? So there's so many different ways to be involved outside of saving personally or asking for money. And I hope that people would not, give their board members the out because they're just focused on individual contributions or who they know and who's in their rolodex.
Great. So we've talked about bringing on board members who are passionate, who can help you recruit resources. I think now the question we want to turn to is how do we make sure that that board is diverse? And although nonprofit boards are becoming more diverse, a lot of them still don't represent the communities that they're serving. So I'm curious how you approach recruiting a diverse board and maybe what diversity looks like for your organization.
I'll take Tina off the hook for this one and jump in. It's a struggle, to be honest with you. It is absolutely a struggle. We went through ASC's Catalyst for Cultural Equity program, a number of our board members, a number of our staff. And if you do that, you learn that Octavia Sewell likes to say, what's in the ground for your organization? How did you get to where you are now? How did it get started? And in the environmental movement in wildlife conservation, particularly in rehabilitation, the majority was white. It was started by white folks that had privilege and had resources that they could put towards doing it. So they weren't getting paid a lot, but they were doing it for free. We're now trying to figure out how do we do a better job of connecting with all communities. I'm proud to say that our staff is the most diverse it's been in years. Our board is getting more diverse. And diversity is different. It's not just being all male and all white. I don't want the board to reflect me. It needs to reflect the community. So we have more females on our board now. Our board chair, 3 of our top board leadership are women. Board chair, vice chair, secretary. So I report to, and 1 male, the treasurer. But we're doing a much better job of trying to connect within communities of color. We now have a board member from Johnson C. Smith University that's just done a tremendous job in connecting us to the African American. We have a board member who works for a company that primarily works with multicultural marketing. He's Latino, so we're working to do a better. It's just building those relationships, having credibility in the community, getting folks that value what we do. And for us, it's the pipeline. How do we get volunteers of various communities, and then how we get that volunteer to be a little bit more engaged, to serve on a community, a committee, and then move them to the board. What doesn't work, and I think we've all learned this, is if you want that person of color on your board and they get on the board and they're the only person that looks like them. And very clear that our board member that's Black and our board members Latino very clearly said, Jim, I do not represent this community. I represent my part of that community. And I think that's what we have to keep moving forward. It's constant. It has got to be intentional. You got to think about it. Your board has to agree to it. And our board wrestles with this every board meeting. We have a DEIA session that talks about how do we make the organization broader in all aspects, staff, volunteering, community service, everything. It's not just board, but how do we better look like the community that we serve?
And thank you, Jim, for letting me off the hook for going first, because that is a tough question that I think most boards here in the Charlotte community are wrestling with now, and we're no different at Loaves and Fishes Friendship Trays. Both of our organizations were started in the faith community, and so we always try and have representation from different faith partners on board. One of the more intentional things that we have done in the last couple of years, because both of our organization, both programs, Friendship Trays and Loaves and Fishes, we provide access to nutritious food. And so many of the families and individuals that we're serving are struggling to put food on their table. So the last thing that they have time for is serving on a board of directors, even though we would love to have client representation on our board. They just don't have the capacity from a time standpoint in order to do that. And so what we look for now, what one of the questions on our board application survey is do you have a lived experience with food insecurity and poverty, and would you be willing to share that lived experience? And it has blown me away that we have had big, corporate executives that will share a heartfelt story of how, yes, they as a child remember growing up hungry or having to utilize food stamps at the checkout. And so that's one of the things that we look for in board members, because we may not be able to get a client who's actively struggling with food insecurity to serve on our board. But if we can get somebody who has a personal connection to our cause and has lived experience with that, then we know that they'll be a tremendous advocate for the people who are struggling now.
Yeah, I think Jim and Tina both use the word that comes to the forefront for me, and that's intentionality. You really have to think through the process and make sure that you're not, to Jim's point, creating a tokenism issue with your board, and to also to steal Octavia's quote about what's in your ground, you just don't know, and so you really have to ask. I think Tina's question that she's proposing to or submitting to prospective board members is great, because you don't know people's experiences and what they bring, despite what they may look like or what you may think where they are in their current lives. I know that some boards use a board matrix where they kind of list what you want on a board, like legal, marketing, demographic info. But I would encourage boards to be careful how they use something like that and to be really specific. I think this helps in this context, because you wouldn't just put, let's say, legal, for instance, right, and mark it off because you have a personal injury attorney, but your board works maybe with employment-based or zoning issues. That's not really helpful. So if you focus more on the actions that you need, I think it broadens your field of sight in terms of prospective board members as you recruit them. So if you have with your budget, you could be a non-CPA owner of a small business or a finance director at a nonprofit. If you're thinking about marketing, it could be a community organizer. It could be bloggers. So there are other ways to think about what you're looking for, which then gives you a broader base to choose someone from. I mean, ultimately, I think the most important thing that you want across all of your board members, which the unifying factor would be, just their passion for the organization's mission. And I think if you focus it on that, then you might be surprised as to how wide a net you can cast in terms of having folks be engaged with your organization.
Great. So I think we were able to touch on a lot of different types of diversity through experience with nonprofits. And Jim, I love hearing about that you talk about DEI efforts in every board meeting. I think that is a fantastic initiative, and set the ground from the start for new board members as you're recruiting that this is something that's critically important to our organization. So great to hear that. So now we've kind of covered the conceptual part of recruitment, and I want to move a little more into logistics. So we have a really interesting note from Joan that I want to start us with, but the question in general is going to be on ethics and code of conduct. And what does it look like for your organization? Do you have one? Do you think it's important? And Joan here says, she does not feel that an ethics code should be necessary if board members have been adequately vetted before being invited to join the board. Additionally, I find it out of character to ask board members to commit to a specific level of funding. This excludes creative and valuable board members who either cannot afford the level required or choose to spread their philanthropic support among other organizations, which I think we touched on earlier pretty well too. She says she has never signed an ethics or commitment document. Now, I serve on a board and I've signed both of those. So I'm really curious to hear your experience with that.
I'll take a turn and I'll jump in first. In a prior life, I was a practicing attorney. And so I say that to say that I'm certainly in favor of having a very clear ethics policy and having folks sign on to it. Now, the financial commitment piece, I certainly agree with Joan there. First, I'll mention that all 501c3 nonprofits are required to file a Form 990, right? And one of those questions on the Form 990 is whether you have a written conflict of interest policy or you require an annual disclosure. And you're not required to do so, but it is a best practice. And since you're going to have your board members disclosing conflicts each year anyway, sometimes organizations do add in an ethics policy with the conflicts of interest policy. Not the same thing, but certainly related. While I agree with Joe in that, you should be having folks join your organization that are, at the utmost integrity levels. I still think that it's great to have clarity on where the organization stands itself with an ethics policy. It's not that anybody's not going to or go against the grain on the policy, but just so that, again, clarity, transparency. This is what we've identified for our organization as a key topic, and just have everybody sign off on it.
And we do as well. We have conflict of interest policy. We have what we call a board covenant and expectations. And the board, it's the board document. I don't have anything to do with it other than keep reminding them that. So every year, the executive committee of our board looks at that document, makes changes that are needed. Sometimes we don't do an event anymore. We don't need that support. Something's changed a little bit. We used to have, for bazillion years here, we didn't require a minimum as a board member. I always thought it was a wrong idea. But several years ago, our advancement committee overruled me. The board overruled and said, no, we want to have pay to play. If you want to be on the board, you're going to have a certain amount. Okay, have at it. And our board fundraising went down year over year. Less money, less people. It was crazy. It's counterintuitive. But we went back to the board, and guess what? We went the other way immediately. Said, okay, that's off the table, done. I think we left money on the table. So we put money out there and said, hey, okay, this is all I have to give. Great. I'm not giving any more. And it was a barrier to folks that couldn't give to that amount. And so we took that off. And now it's just as the virus said, we want to be one of your top philanthropic organizations that you give to. But we're very clear with the ethics piece too, is I think everybody being a member of AFP knows that we can't be running around there sharing all this information about our donors. And there's some very confidential information that gets shared at board meetings. And so the board needs to understand that they can't go out in the community and say, oh, by the way, so-and-so gave us this much last year. You know what they gave us this year? They didn't give us hardly anything. That's just part of what they have to understand, is the conversations that they have in that meeting, particularly in an executive session, have to remain confidential and have legal ramifications as us as an organization. And once and the board agrees, so when the covenant's brought to them, they talk about it, they discuss it, they make changes, they vote on it. It's a voted, adopted document for that year, and then every one of them has to sign it. And they agree that I'm going to attend so many board meetings. I'm going to be such of a fundraiser. I'm going to maintain the ethics of the organization. If there's any conflict of interest, I'm going to disclose that. All of that's spelled out. It's very clear. Here's what the board expects of the board, is what it boils down to. And it seems to work very fine. We've had never anyone push back and say, I'm not signing that.
And we do use a signed document for a conflict of interest. And if they want to use a pledge form, we have them sign their pledge form, although they don't have to fill out a pledge form to make a gift to our organization. We have a packet of information that we don't share with them after they've joined the board. Our key expectations are outlined at the first time we meet with them about their interest in joining our board. So I've been recruited for boards before where they just told me up front, oh, it's super easy. You don't have anything to do. It's easy. We'll just get together. We have a lot of fun. And they really needed me to do a lot of work, but they needed to get me on the board. So it really wasn't the truth. And I don't believe in surprising a board. I mean, if you want a board to do something specific for you and to work hard for you, you're better off disclosing that at the get-go. They may not say yes, but you don't want them to say yes if they can't fulfill the obligations that or the expectations that you want them to anyway. So at the outset, we don't have them sign the key expectation list, but they certainly know what all of the key expectations for every board member are. And then at the bottom of our form, if that's too much, we also list a variety of other ways for you to be engaged with our organization, because we outline it that there is a lot of work. We are a working board and there are a lot of expectations. We want you to be engaged, but if you can't fulfill that at this time, here's other things that you can do to further our cause. So I believe in transparency, because you will get what you ask for, but you can't recruit board members under the guise that it's just fun, you know, we're a great group and we have a lot of fun together. I mean, spell out the good, bad, and the ugly as well, and they'll work twice as hard for you.
Absolutely. And I'm going to jump back in. We do the same thing. And so when folks come to us, we share the current. So if they're looking at next year's board serve, we'll share the current covenant and say, look, this thing may change a little bit, but here's really what you're getting into next year. We spell it out. And it's helped. I mean, sometimes people just say, it's a little bit more than I was expecting, or I don't want to do it. But it lessens heartburn in the future if you're clear with what's going on. And I think you absolutely have to be. And I tell them, I'm saying with Tina, we're going to have fun, but it's a lot of work too. And you need to understand that this is what we expect.
Great. Yeah, certainly setting those expectations from the start, critically important. We've just got time for about 2 or 3 more questions for this first session. So a couple more, and we'll try to keep the answers short to get through as many as we can. Don't forget to put your questions in the chat box. So very briefly, how do you feel about term limits for your board? Do you have board members with alternating terms? Do you find it helpful? How do you keep the blood fresh, keep getting new ideas on the board?
We do have term limits. It's in our bylaws. You can serve 2 3-year terms. One exception is a board chair that happens to be the chair on their 6th year. The first year, they can serve a 7th year to complete that 2-year term as a board chair. With some board members, and I know this is being recorded, so don't share it with our board. With some board members, that term can't come quick enough. You know, it's almost like, man, or the 3-year and they're not at, and they can't just get an automatic. So after a 3-year term, they have to be renominated and the board votes them back in. And we've had an occasion where a board member was not voted back for a 2nd term. They just didn't fulfill what was in the covenant, the expectations. And then there's been other board members, I'd have them serve for 10 years if I could. They're phenomenal. And I hate to see when they hit that. We just lost a couple that hit that 6th year and they had to roll off. But term limits is crucial. I've been on a board with people that have been on it for 15 years, and I'm like, what are you still doing here? It's insane.
We have the same term limits of 2, and we just revised our bylaws after the merger and decided that the 2 3-year terms seem to work best, but certainly not everybody fulfills does a full 6 years. But we also reevaluate each and every year. Like, we monitor board attendance, and we just had somebody roll off that wasn't scheduled to roll off for another year, because with the new merger, the board meeting time limits and some work complications didn't align anymore. And so they weren't able to attend and didn't really feel like they were as engaged as they wanted to be. And so you don't need to wait for that 3-year term to be up. I mean, you can also reevaluate, because life happens to everybody, right? Unexpected things happen. So have a governance committee that can help hold people accountable, or just check in with people. You know, if you have those waning board members that still have 2.5 years left and you're thinking, oh my goodness, it's going to be a long 2.5 years, you know, utilize a governance committee that can check in with that board member, because they might just be experiencing some type of life crisis, you know, that's pulled them away, and give them an opportunity to gracefully bow out of their term and maybe come back when life is, you know, less hectic for them. So, but a two back-to-back 3-year terms seems to be a good enough time for somebody who's truly engaged and passionate. And like Jim said, I'm certainly sad to see some of them roll off at the end of 6 years. And sometimes they take a year off and they could rejoin after a year as well as a new member. So
great. And Devari, I want to move on for just a quick moment here, but I've got an audience question for you from Robin Stewart. What do you think about having relatives on the board? Is it a good idea, even if they have experience or leadership?
So you're referring to relatives of staff or relatives of board members?
Robin, you're welcome to unmute and let us know, but let's go with relatives to maybe staff here.
I was gonna say, like the board members, like setting up this board. I know I've always heard that it's not a good idea to have relatives on the board, but even if you do, I mean, is it a good idea, even if they do have the experience or the leadership? In other words, my basic question, is it a good idea to put relatives on your board when you're setting it up for the first time?
So it depends on how many people are on your board. So if you've got, let's say, 5 board members and 2 are related, I think you're okay. If you've got less than 3 and 2 are related, you might have an issue. In fact, at the foundation, when we do our due diligence on a new nonprofit, before we grant out dollars to them, we'll make sure they're in a 501c3. They pass public support tests on the Form 990. We'll also make sure that they have unrelated board members. So if you're an organization with, like, again, 3 or less board members and 2 are related, then you don't necessarily pass our test for a variety of reasons. And so if you're able to get some additional folks, because again, those board members might be properly situated, might be the best folks for the organization. We can try to find somebody else to even those numbers out a little bit. I think it'd be okay.
Oh, okay. All right. I just heard some horror stories from times past where people set up these boards and they're non-related, and they actually lost control of the nonprofit that they set up. It was like taken away from it. It was their vision, but the board didn't. I guess they moved away from the vision of the person that created the nonprofit, and they lost it. So I'm like, do I get relatives so it can be like a family legacy, not necessarily to benefit the family, but the vision that's coming from me and my family members? I don't want somebody 10 years down the road, they snatch it away from me, and now it's taking a life on its own, and it's going to something that I really didn't design it because it was my vision in the beginning. That's the only thing I'm scared of boards. So that's why I'm asking.
Well, and I want to make sure I love my family. I love my wife. I love my son. I love my aunts and cousins. I had no way in hell I would have them on the board. I would fight tooth and nail for them to be my boss. But I get where you're coming from. And that's sometimes the case for family foundations, right? You look at some of the key family foundations, one in particular in this community I won't name, it's still very heavily, the board is members of that family. That's a different animal, so to speak, than a nonprofit board. I've been here for 15 years, way longer than any of our board members, but I'm not the organization. I get that. The board is.
Right.
The board is this organization, not me. And I have to live with that, because when they make decisions, even though I think it may be in the best interest of the organization, at some point I'm not going to be here anymore. And so the Raptor Center needs that continuity of unbiased leadership taking us into the future. But no, I love my wife, but
So
and Robin, I would add, like, I don't know what your business, I don't know what your nonprofit is, but I would, Devire might be able to add in, different tax codes. If you really see your business as your business, maybe 501c3 status isn't the right tax code status, because a nonprofit isn't owned by anybody. It's owned by the community. And so there might be other ways to protect your idea outside of a 501c3 status as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great advice, Tina. And Robin, I would encourage you to reach out to me maybe after the program to think through whether best for you to be a 501c3 public charity, or this is more of a private foundation type, or just maybe get a better sense of what you're doing, and we can try to find out how we can assist. Because to Jim's point, having family members in place doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get the outcome that you want.
Got it. Okay, thank you, everybody. Thank you so much.
So we've got another audience question I want to make sure we have time to chat about, which is from Shelley. Does anyone on the panel have experience with alumni boards? I'd be interested in hearing about how you see the role as an alumni board versus governing board member.
I have some experience. I have an experience. We called it something different, but we called it an honorary board that we had at a previous organization that I worked with. And it was a way to honor long-serving leaders of the different organization. But we did make it very clear that they were ex officio, non-voting, that they were not involved in the day-to-day governance of the organization. It was more of a privilege to be for recognition purposes, but they also helped us further our cause during different fundraising ventures. So they were more heavily involved in stewardship and cultivation activities. So again, you just make sure that you have key expectations outlined for an honorary or alumni or an advisory board versus a governing board. So just make sure that you're clear when you're inviting somebody to participate on a board. Sometimes the word board, people make the assumption that they're part of the governance board. So just make sure in your inviting that you're clear about what you're inviting them to and what the expectations are.
Great. And for our last minute here, if I could just ask each of you one sentence and answer, what makes you want to serve on a board?
The same reason I want board members to serve on mine. I'm passionate for both organizations that I support and work on. I was on a 4-hour board meeting virtual call yesterday with Ursh here in North Carolina. I'll be on a call next week for North Carolina Science Network. I love both of those institutions and will do whatever I can to support them and move forward.
Yeah, for me, it's the opportunity to add value and to be of true service and to really be able to help.
And same, I would channel my inner Rotarian in me and say service above self feels good.
Wonderful. Well, I think that is a great way to wrap up this first session. Really appreciate your thoughtful answers there. We are going to take a quick break. We will be back at 1:20 for the follow-up to this session. We've recruited all these fabulous board members. How do we keep them? So look forward to chatting more with you about that. The next session will be moderated by Nick Stewart, and we will see you at 1:20.
Thank you for doing an excellent job moderating our first session on board recruitment. My name is Nick Stewart. I am an AFP board member and I'm the philanthropy manager at the Relatives. We are going to switch gears and we have talked about recruiting board members. Now we're going to talk about keeping them. We're going to discuss board retention during the next session. As Jesse said, Joan Zimmerman was not available to be here today. However, she did provide responses, and Jesse is going to be playing the role of Joan today. I was joking earlier that as a massive and lifelong soap opera fan, I get to indulge and live one of my dreams by saying the role of Joan Zimmerman will be played by Jesse Herman today. So thank you for indulging me, everybody. We'll go ahead and get started. And I will start with Jim, Tina, and Deviri and ask them about building authentic relationships with individual board members.
I'll jump in. I think this is one of the harder things. It's one of the things I love to do, but it's the thing that we never make enough time for. Right now I have 24 board members. So if I just want to see one of them a week, I'd only see them twice a year, and so how do we make that time? And here's the other thing. Since February of 2020, we've had 2 in-person board meetings with half the board, July and September of this year. And then we went virtual after that. And we're virtual before that. So really, some of my board I haven't seen in person in a year and a half. So how do you keep that? One, I've tried to reach out to them as much as possible. This is the other part, that board wants to work. So I, as a board member, want to do work for the organizations I serve on. I want them to do the same. So I'm always reaching out to a board member for their opinion. If I see their organization in the paper, I still look at a paper. Other things. So, the dinosaur, right? I just try to connect with them. If I can grab coffee, lunch, breakfast, it's those things. It's not just, hey, I'm going to see you at next month's board meeting. It's what are those relationships? I really do I feel that's one of the hard parts about having a board our size. I'd rather the board be 10 or 12 people. That way I could really get to know them. But at where we are in the current stage of our organization, I need connections. We're getting ready to go into another campaign sort of thing. And that takes people. And we need people on the board to be able to do that. So I have to have my numbers up. I need to have boots on the ground. But it's just those little things, cards, phone calls. I just called a board member the other day. I hadn't talked to him in a while. Hey, have you got a moment? Let's just talk. Not about the board. How's your football team doing it? All these things that we need to be able to do and know their interests. Here's the other thing. Know your board members. Know if they have children. Know when their birthday is. Send them a birthday card. We had a board member just had a child. Well, we send her a gift. And do these little things that you would want done. How do you want to be treated as a human being and how to be used as a human being? Your board's the same way. They're just people. We just need to work with them the same. But it's that quality of time, it's just not there right now. excuse me, the quantity of time is not there. COVID had a lot to do with that, is how do we make the most quality of the very scarce time that we have with them?
Well, Jim took all my answers. But Jim, I have you beat because I'm currently at 28 board members. That's how many people it takes to rein me in, is 28 people. I would never recommend a board that size. Never, never, never would I recommend a board that size. The only reason we have a board that large is because Friendship Trays and Loaves and Fishes just merged. And every board member was invited to be part of the new board. We will eventually downsize through attrition, but every board member was so excited about this upcoming merger that they didn't want to roll off. They wanted to be part of what we're going to do next. But yes, managing close personal relationships with 28 people, that's a whole lot of cups of coffee, right? And I'm already heavily caffeinated. So watch out, folks. But yes, as many personal connections as you can make. We encourage our board members to actually come to our events. We just had a big Tour de Turns bike ride outside in the open. And I can't tell you the amount of board members that were there. Even if they didn't ride a bike, we had them serving, lunch afterwards or passing out cold towels to the bikers. And so I think the more that you can get your board together in person, when it's safe to do so, everybody listen to Gibby Harris, please. But when it's safe to do so, go back to in-person gatherings and get to know one another, because people are people beyond being a board member.
Yeah, I think hearing the number of folks on your boards gave me heart palpitations. I mean, my goodness, from a person who manages boards, much less serves on them, that is a lot of energy, a lot of ideas, some good and some not. So kudos to you all for managing those groups. I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of how to build those relationships. It's an incredibly difficult time right now, being in this remote environment to keep that engagement up. So stewardship, the time, intentionality, touching base with board members, sharing the organization highlights and ways to be involved are all things that you can do. But just knowing that it may not be successful over the last 18 months and for however many months going forward.
One benefit I have and a trick, we're outdoors, right? So, and we're a destination so the folks can come to the Raptor Center. So we have all of our board members' photos on our website. And I pretty much grill our visitor services staff to know our board. So anytime a board member shows up, they call me. We had a board member just pop in yesterday, right? Came to the hospital for a minute. I'm getting a call. Hey, by the way, so-and-so's down here. Great, thank you. And so, but I try to get the board to let me know when they're coming. They're like, oh, Jim, we don't want to bother you. You're so busy. Your relationship with me is the most important thing going on right now as a board member. So you need to let them. So we encourage the board when they just come out to let us know they're coming. That way I can be here or at least have somebody on the staff be here to talk to them. So yeah, it's getting them to acknowledge, and as Tim said, come to your events, be there. It doesn't have to be the fundraising events, the fun stuff, right? It's the fun things that we do. Let them come see the mission in action.
Yeah, that goes a long way, Jim. I think when staff put so much into making sure that board members know what's happening, I think they feel even more compelled to show up, not just for the organization, but for those staff members personally.
Thank you. Those are all wonderful, wonderful examples. Joan, do you have any examples of how nonprofit leaders or development professionals have built strong or authentic relationships with you?
Why, yes. So Joan feels that the most authentic way to build that staff board relationship is for the executive director or president to ask the board member for input. She really feels that it's important to keep them informed, respond to their questions and suggestions, but really just have them engaged in the planning. She says special perks are nice, but if they are costly to the organization, most board members, myself included, would consider them an unnecessary expenditure.
Thank you, Joan. So I have a whole list of questions and I'm going to pick one of my favorites here. What are your tips for running a board meeting that isn't boring?
So we do a mission moment. That's the important part for us. So every board meeting has what we call a mission moment, and it's something to do with what we do. It's bird related for the most part. So we either make paper airplanes. We did a board meeting at TIAA a few years ago, and we made paper airplanes and held whirligigs and talked about flight, and the board members got to go outside and just fly them around. We bring birds. We've done different events. So every board meeting needs to be that. And it's just that piece of it. When we were doing board meetings in person, we'd bring a bird. We would do a tour of the center, show something different. So it's the engaging. It's not listening to financial reports. It's not going over certain things. That's the engaging. So we try to minimize the report outs, and those are done pre-board in narratives from the committees. It's the really meat. And so when we come to a board meeting, we're going to do something fun as an activity, and then we're going to have something juicy with meat on it for them to discuss. There's a big issue that the board needs to wrestle with, and that gets their attention.
Yeah, so I think that, you know, the board that plays together stays together, right? So, I mean, a little team building is not a waste of time. So don't force it. And this is not, you know, saying an adjective in front of your name. Like, that's not what I'm talking about. I mean, like, recognizing successes and encourage to share your personal stories. And I would make that an agenda item, discussing good things like, you know, happy events, marriages, births. But most importantly, the meeting should be a positive use of the board members' time. So utilize the consent agenda and let the meeting be a time to address those strategic issues. So you're sending out committee reports, the president's report, you know, ahead of time, so the board comes into meeting informed, already having given thought to the agenda items, then you're set for a productive meeting.
And these guys keep taking my hand. We do the same thing. Mission moments are critical. And it's amazing how when a board member is assigned, I had my board member emailed just that we had a board meeting just this week, and he emailed me. He was so embarrassed because he broke down in tears during his mission moment, but he was sharing such a compelling story. And I emailed him afterwards. I said, oh my goodness, never apologize for that. I mean, you had us so captivated, and thank you for sharing something that was so personal and touching to you. So mission moments lay the groundwork for a very compassionate, you know, focused meeting on mission. So definitely a great idea. I email out in advance and an electronic board packet so that they can read that and update themselves, so that the meeting isn't just listening to somebody read minutes. We never read minutes and update reports. We put that all in consent agenda at the beginning and only pull it out if somebody has questions. And then the bulk of our meeting can be spent in discussions. You know, what do we need everybody's input on the task at hand? I mean, sometimes it's more formal with particular motions that we need to approve to move things forward. But if it can be, you know, that saying, like, if it can, like the meeting that should have been an email, like, don't have a board meeting that should have just been something included in a board packet. And again, I cannot wait to go back to meeting in person. We used to serve food. You know, how do you solve hunger without feeding people? So we broke bread together as a board and enjoyed dining. And so the lunch part was just interacting, where you found out that so-and-so had a baby, or that so-and-so's kid graduated from college, or that somebody had a grandchild, or what have you. You've got to make time for that kind of social networking as well, that we will do as soon as this pandemic is in the rearview mirror.
Joan has exactly the same thoughts. Just wanted to add one last thing. She says, if your board is a sociable one, absolutely arrange an optional pre or post meeting catch up, which I think speaks a lot to what you just mentioned, Tina, but have that opportunity to, you know, create community and foster those relationships before you get into the nitty gritty of administration.
Thank you, everybody. Those are excellent tips, and they were definitely not boring. So job well done. We did have a question in the chat regarding engagement during a pandemic. And so you guys talked a lot about mission moments being social at board meetings. How have you worked around engaging board members at a board meeting when you're all on Zoom?
Well, even in our in-person meetings, and we did this out of fact, because what board members would do is they'd roll in for a 5 o'clock meeting, and then they'd go get something to eat, They'd grab something to drink. Oh, hey, Tina, I haven't seen you since the last board meeting. How you been? It'd take 30 minutes to corral these folks, like herding cats, to get them to sit down. So we said, okay, we're going to put a nip to that. So we said the first 30 minutes is connection time. It's just social. Come over, grab a drink, do whatever you want to do. So we do that online. So we start the Teams call at 5 o'clock and we start business at 5:30. And we get most folks that will jump in at 5 and it's just catch up. Hey, Nick, what have you been up to recently? You know, and God, Jesse, we saw you somewhere. So it's just that. We did during some of the outdoor, we brought the board and we went to Heist Brewing. We had a beer. I found that alcohol works wonders with my bosses. And so we meet quite often. We're going to be at Foothills Brewing in Winston-Salem this coming Saturday. If there's an opportunity to get food or beverage in front of them, we will. And we just do it. We just have board social about once a quarter. We try to just get together as a group if we can safely and just have fun and fellowship.
Yeah, I found that this is really an issue for new board members. So folks who have joined since we've been in this remote environment, for them to feel connected, not just to the organization, but to the rest of the board. And so for one of the boards that I'm actually on, what we do is start off each meeting with the professional or personal highlight, something outside of the organization's cause and mission, because there's no longer the opportunity to, as you all just described, have those conversations before the meeting starts or afterwards, or even during the meeting, right? And so it's a good opportunity to have folks share and get a chance to know each other, because ultimately those connections, I think, help the board in the long term in terms of working together with each other.
Thank you, everybody. One of the dangers of meeting virtually and being part of this kind of virtual world that we're in is complacency, being disengaged. So can you speak to how, what are tips for motivating complacent board members? How do you engage people who have sort of disconnected and you want to keep them around?
So Joan had a lot of thoughts here. She says one of the best ways to start is to have a personal meeting with them and ask them specifically to take on a special project that is directly suited to their skills. Give them a hard deadline for the project, and if they do not accept with enthusiasm, ask diplomatically if they're finding their board membership interesting and challenging, and ask in what areas they'd like to be more involved. She says that being politely, all caps, politely direct is never wrong. It saves time and disappointment.
And I agree. I mean, again, I have a great governance board and an incredible board president that we have discussions before the meeting and we say, who haven't we heard from for a while? We track attendance, and in our governance committee, if somebody hasn't attended, if they've missed 2 or more meetings, my governance committee gives them a call. Somebody is assigned to, follow up with that person and just say, hey, just checking in. How's everything going? And it's not punitive. It's just meant to, hey, is everything going on? We missed you at last month's meeting, and people want to be missed if they're gone, if they're not there. So the onus is on your board members to check in on one another and to make sure that people are feeling heard and that they are engaged. So, and sometimes that's too much, especially if you have 28 board members like I do. I can't possibly track them all down. And so that's how we utilize our governance committee. And, people can get set up with board buddies, to check in with one another. And again, it's just some of the tactics and techniques we've used to check in and follow up on anybody who's missed a few meetings or doesn't have a voice at the meetings or doesn't speak up during those meetings.
I love Tina's idea of the board buddy, have that mentor, that kind of partner in it. One of the things that's made, it's a sort of a blessing and a curse, is virtual meetings, right? We've had better board attendance than we ever had in person. I mean, some of our board members are 100% because you can do it anywhere. You can do it from your phone, in your car, wherever you are. There should be no reason unless you're completely incapacitated. So everybody's on the call, but are they really engaged? That's the question. So right now I'm looking at all these people in here. Some of you that I don't see you. So are you taking a nap or are you just are we blowing you away? I mean, so that's the hard part is, yeah, they're there, but are they really there? And I like Tina's point of asking questions, and not everybody's wanting to jump in. So how do you really figure out, almost like a test, right after the board meeting, hey, what was said during this section of the board meeting? I know I would never do that, but how do you really figure out? I'm still wrestling with that one. Now, we know those people that do not come, and we have it on our covenant. It has us very specific, 75% participation. You're going to attend. We only meet 6 times a year. So if you talk about missing a couple meetings, you're out of it. So we really push that, but I'm now concerned because in a room, I can tell if you're engaged. I can look at your body language and see if you're zoning out. But on a call, you really don't know. Particularly those people that are just, you don't see them video or you don't hear a word of them. So that's what I'm concerned about.
Yeah, and I agree with everything everyone has said. I'll just add that, sometimes the board members' lack of engagement has nothing to do with the organization and can be more indicative of a number of other factors in their life. So, talking to them, being transparent, politely frank, I think gets you pretty far.
We've had a couple questions and comments in the staff regarding board self-evaluations, and would love to hear your perspectives on metrics and format when you're asking the board to evaluate their own performance.
We do a board self-assessment. It's both. It's how are they individually engaged in working as a board member, and how do they see the overall board? So we get both perspectives. What am I doing as a board member, and how do I feel the board is doing? And that's done once a year. And the chair, the results don't come to me. They go to the board chair. And the board chair looks at them, and there's decisions are made. What do we need to do to be able to meet those needs? But the board, we ask them, are you attending board meetings? Are you doing, we also send them a copy of the covenant, right? It says, here's what you agreed to do. Now, let's see, how would you grade yourself on what you're doing? And it's interesting, that some people have a very high opinion of themselves, and others are very realistic and say, I'm just not doing what I need to do.
I've done them before. We've used them before at other organizations that I've been a part of. We have a much more informal procedures program here at my current location at Loaves and Fishes and Friendship Trays. But again, we do check in with them, and we ask the board member, part of the board governance check-ins with our board members is to ask them what they're the most proud of. What are you the most proud of that you or that we accomplished this year? And so again, you get them focusing on the positives, but I will tell you, board members that aren't actively engaged, they're hard critiques of themselves. And so they'll sometimes be like, I didn't do enough. Maybe I should either plan on doing this much more the next year, or maybe life is too difficult for me at this time or too overwhelming. And maybe I should roll off the board until life is a little less demanding. So whether it's a formal board assessment that they do, or whether it be a more informal conversation that somebody has with another board member, I think any type of self-reflection can always be a very valuable tool.
Yeah, and I'm a proponent of the board self-assessment in 2 facets. One, for a board member to talk about the performance of the board as a whole, but also themselves individually. For the reasons that have been previously expressed. It's a great way to have folks be self-reflective, to think through how the organization is moving through the board, but then also their own individual input. And I think you're right. I think Tina said that it's surprising sometimes for the board members that haven't been engaged, how much they have to share at the end. And so again, it can be more reflective of them not being able to come to that particular meeting, but them also still having ideas. They are passionate about the organization. That's why they signed up to begin with, for some ideas to share. And so I would encourage you all to do that at least once to see how it goes. But I think it's a good way to see how the board feels about the organization in the current structure.
Great. Judging by the chat, there's a lot of interest in this topic. One of the questions that was submitted prior to the event was about utilizing surveys, annual commitment letters as tools for board retention. Do you feel like the self-evaluation is something that helps you retain board members and keep them engaged? And then what are there any specific tools that you use, a specific platform that you use for surveying board members?
I'll jump in and say, I think it's really important to give board members a chance to get out. So to have a commitment letter each year, a chance to gracefully bow out before the term is over, or actively, affirmatively state an intention to remain committed. Otherwise, you end up with board members who don't have time to be engaged, no longer have the interest, and ultimately, aren't serving the organization in the best way possible. But they don't know how to leave. And so if maybe they don't want to leave because they're not engaged or they haven't really stopped to think about it, this is a good opportunity to say, wait a minute, maybe I need to roll off. I can come back when I'm in a better position to assist. I think Tina mentioned it earlier, but I think it's a great way each year for great board members, not so great board members, everybody recommits to finish their term or an opportunity to leave.
And I think sometimes I think there are tools out there. I see Angie just put a tool in the chat box. So thank you, Angie, for sharing that. But I will also tell you, no tool will replace having a conversation. And oftentimes, especially with a disinterested or disengaged board member, we want to send them a survey or send them but if they're disengaged, the odds of them actually clicking on the link and filling anything out are slim to none. So we have this fear of avoiding a difficult conversation, but there's nothing wrong with just checking in on someone. So never let a tool or a platform just replace a friendly conversation with somebody.
Yeah, and I can't remember where we got the tool we use. It could be Board Source or NC Center for Nonprofits. It's standard questions. But back to Tina's point, just open the door. A lot of times they just need to say, hey, we've missed you. Is everything okay? And they'll go, well, I'm glad you asked me. And then they'll just start dumping on you, right? And you're just like, okay. And then at the end of the conversation, it's just, is this the right time for you to still be here? We don't want to lose it. The other part is it's sometimes hard for them to let go. It's also hard for us to let go of them. Because remember, we recruited these people to get on, the board got them on there. So now it's like, well, they didn't really work out. If you look at the nonprofit world, we were probably the worst at firing people, And how many of you have ever had to fire a board member or have a board member fired? You talk to the board chair and just say, hey, this person got to go. We just don't do that. It's not in the nature of who we are as nonprofit people. It's not in our DNA. So the board member is the same. We want to do everything we can because at the end of the day, if that board member is not doing that, we see it as our failure, right? Oh God, I just couldn't get them to attend the meeting, right? I just couldn't get them to go on that ask. It's not us, it's them. And we have to realize that, and just not everyone's meant for it. And when it's time for them to go, let them go. Just let them go. And we'll all be happier. So I think the retention piece is not about who we want to retain, but really who needs to be just leaving our relationship. Actually, it's kind of weird. I've got a better relationship now with a board member than I had when he was here. He always was making excuses. I'm so sorry. I apologize. And now he's not here. He's working as off for the organization. It's crazy, right? Because he doesn't feel obligated because he's no longer a board member, but he has to do it. So we found a better, as Tina said, we found a better role for him off the board than being on the board. It's strange, but it worked out that way.
Well, we've talked about evaluation, and we're going to switch gears and talk a little bit about gratitude. So what are your favorite ways of expressing gratitude to your board members and donors? Or since we love to steal things, what was your favorite way that a nonprofit that you've been involved with expressed their gratitude to you?
Well, so I'll tell you again, none of us have huge budgets. And so it's not even about swag. It's just noticing what people do, and valuing their time and their energy. But if we are going to do board gifts, we try and make them more relevant to our mission. So again, we like to break bread together. So we had a strategic retreat this year, and we could not be together in person. And so we actually delivered fresh baked cinnamon rolls and freshly squeezed orange juice to each board member's home before the event, so that they all had to just warm it up in their oven. And so we broke bread together virtually. We just had 4 board members roll off. And so we gave them a cutting board or a charcuterie board that had our logo engraved in it, because we're the food people. So it didn't necessarily make sense to give them something, you know, a plaque or anything like that. We're the food people. So what's a food item that they could use that had our, you know, that had our logo on it? So just try and, you know, Jim might give out big birds. I don't know what he does for board gifts, but try and make it mission related, right?
So I love giving notes, right? So how many of you, I'm going to look at my office. Probably don't even have one right now. Do I get something on that? How many of you write notes, right? Remember what these are? You take a little thing, you take this thing, it's called a pen, you scribble on it, you put a little thing on it called a stamp, and you drop it in this box, and miraculously it shows up at somebody's house. It's not the click of a mouse or something. Handwritten notes. And it's not just that they did something on the board. Again, if one of you is on the board and your company's recognized, you make the news or something, write a little note, right? We just had a board member at a corporation that had a huge, big celebration. I wrote them a note. You know, like they were the person. I know they're not the CEO, but they had a role in it somewhere. And just a great job. Congratulations on your new huge thing that your company did. Yada yada yada. Swag. You talked about swag. Well, we don't buy it. We give it a week. So I had somebody come in the other day and said, "Hey, Jim, you want some stuff?" We absolutely. Guess what? This is going to go to a board meeting. So when we do in-person board meetings, the board member that did something will get something that someone, I love regifting stuff, right? So someone gives it to me, I give it to a board member. The other is that, as Tina said, so every board member that rolls off, if you know Scott Partridge, you know his art, he's a local artist that does remarkable. He was on ASC's CLT graduation piece. Well, he does commissioned pieces for us. We sell his work in the gift shop. And so every board member that rolls off gets a unique Scott Partridge bird, which is their favorite species. We ask them when they're coming in, what's your favorite bird? We ask them first question. And we've got that. So now when they leave, we know that we're going to give so-and-so a hawk, or we're going to give so-and-so an eagle, or we're going to give so-and-so an owl.
So I was right. You do give out big birds.
We give out big birds. Absolutely. We do give out big birds. And it's again, the personal part. What does that person want? It's just recognizing and sending those notes and those things. And we try to do stuff in front of a board meeting, right? So who better to recognize than in front of their peers? And just, again, if someone did, like Tina said, someone does really something cool for the organization, I'll make sure at a board meeting that I'm thanking that person for their huge effort in front of their board members. One, it guilts the rest of the board. And they're like, oh my God, they did that. Well, I got to do something else too. But it just recognizes them. You know, they want to be recognized in front of their peers. We all do. We want to be recognized in front of our peers. So that's just one thing.
Something that Joan recommended and that I've done personally in other nonprofits is giving a gift of a book. She said she recently received Amanda Gorman's The Hill We Climb from a nonprofit, and that she'll treasure it, and the giver and organization will be remembered each time she looks at or opens the book. So finding a topic that relates to your mission, maybe you have a program with an author giving out copies of their books, is a very inexpensive and impactful way to give those gifts.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that, that gifts for gifts' sake don't really work out that well. I think board members don't really want the organization to spend any money on them, but it's nice that when you're thoughtful about saying thank you. So the handwritten notes from staff or clients definitely go a long way, or gifts that are uniquely tied to the organization and can be meaningful. So I second, I say ditto to what was said previously.
Great. Well, believe it or not, y'all, we are only about 5 minutes away from the end of this program. And I want to make sure that everybody here has an opportunity or not everybody here, but anybody that has a question for this terrific panel, to have the opportunity to ask maybe something that we didn't cover in the first or second session. So if you have a specific question that you don't feel was addressed earlier, then please feel free to unmute yourself and ask our amazing panel of nonprofit experts.
I love it when we're that good that we've just answered every board question that anybody could have ever possibly had.
Well, see,
Well,
Nick
like I
just gave
said,
me
you're
a gift.
Panel.
Nick gave me a gift by calling me an expert, being a part of you other three. So that's showing gratitude there. So Nick, I owe you.
You can pay me later. It's fine. Well, Tina, you're right. You are all that good. It looks like that you have covered every possible board question that anybody could ever have. So congratulations and thank you. I do want to turn it over to Jesse and Deviri from Foundation for the Carolinas to wrap us up.
Great. Thank you, Nick. Thank you all for joining us today. I think I've certainly learned a lot hearing from other folks who are in nonprofits, working in different types of nonprofits. I think a really great conversation, and we're so glad you were all able to participate. So at the Foundation for the Carolinas, we have a lot of different ways to engage the nonprofit community, whether that is opening up a fund with the foundation, exploring different resources, learning more about nonprofit administration. We're here to help as a community foundation. You can learn more at fftc.org. All of our contact information is also on the website, and please reach out to us with any questions. Deviri, anything you'd like to add?
No, that was perfect. Other than just saying thank you all for attending and continuing to give us as a resource to assist however we can.
All right. Well, it was great to see you all. And for AFP members, I guess we'll see you next month.
Thank you, everybody.
All right, thank you all.